Hey guys, it's Josh. I know it's been a while since I've last done a video regarding the reading series for the Silmarillion. Um, I've been busy with college, IRL stuff outside of college, and then also I've been sick off and on, so I do apologize for that. To make up for that, I will be reading as soon as I can open up the book here. I'm going to be reading chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 today in various parts. So yeah, just wanted to let y'all know that I will be continuing this, of course. It will be a little sporadic at times. I do apologize for that. But before we get into the video, just wanted to do a quick update on things that I am going to be doing with my channel, as well as like a recap for the previous chapters. So I'll get the update stuff for my channel done first. Basically, I am starting up a ghost hunting group with 3 of my best friends, so that's cool. Of course, we're going to be starting out in Colorado because of things going on at home that kind of require me to be close by. But once that issue is resolved, I will be so glad to be doing ghost hunting adventures with my friends outside of Colorado. I made a community post about it on my YouTube channel, so if you want to go see the posts and all that, feel free to. Anyways, with that out of the way, recap for the previous chapters of the Silmarillion, because I know one of you who likes reading these, watching these videos, needs a recap, so I will get that recap for you. Basically, the very, very first chapter, although not the official first chapter, you know, that one basically just goes over the creation of the universe, Arda, and the music of the Ainur, Melkor being an ass for, like, creating his own themes, and is like, oh, I want to create things too, so where's the secret fire? The secret fire being with Iluvatar, which, if you are of the Judeo-Christian, like, tradition, you will probably understand that to be the spirit of God. So, there's that. And then, with the creation of Arda, the universe, the Valar, who are the most powerful of the Ainur, start to go down into Arda itself to kind of prepare the world for the awakening of the elves and humans, which in all of Tolkien's works, he refers to humans as men, like, not, like, exclusively, like, people of the male persuasion, but, like, it's kind of an odd thing to explain when you're half out of it, but in, I think it was Old German or something. Correct me if I'm wrong with this, anyone who's a Tolkien expert, but when Tolkien uses men, he refers to all of humanity, so there's that. But the second chapter, though not the official second chapter, talks about all of the Valar, like Manwë, Melkor, Ulmo, Tulkas, Orome, and then also the ladies of the Valar, like Varda, Yavanna, Ivana, and all those wonderful beings. Well, Melkor isn't a wonderful being because he's, like I said before, an ass, so there's that. Also, it does talk about the Balrogs, which are fiery demons who... It's strange, because, like, in the movies, the Balrog of Morgoth that was in Moria had wings, but in The Lord of the Rings, it's kind of like wishy-washy on whether they have wings or not, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So I do apologize if I'm not completely up to date with that, but it also, that chapter also mentions Sauron, who, in the Silmarillion, like at the beginning of it, he is more or less Melkor's right-hand man. So, there's that. Then the official first chapter basically goes over the creation of, like, Almarin, and kind of like the Valar, like, celebrating with the Spring of Arda, Melkor coming back from the Void with a lot of his servants, and being all like, oh, hey, I see this wonderful place, I hate it, let's burn this land down as well as the 2 lamps. So they do that, Almarin's destroyed. The Valar have to hold the world together, while Melkor and his servants go back laughing back to Angband. No, wait, no. Utumno. They go back to Utumno. Sorry, I get those 2 places confused at times. I do apologize. But, yeah, they go to, like, the enemies of the Valar come into Arda, take out the 2 lamps, book it back to Utumno. The Valar, who are good guys, still have to, like, you know, protect the world and whatnot, because they have to wait for the children of Iluvatar to come up. So they have to use a lot of their power just to hold the world together. And they do that, but then they're like, you know what? We really don't want to have to deal with Melkor anymore. Let's just go to a different place. So they go to a place called Amon, which a lot of you may know as Valinor, and they set up shop there. And then, once that is all done, in that chapter, 2 of the Valar are, like, really impatient. Well, one of them is impatient, the other one is kind of, like, forced to do something, because the other one created something. So, Aule is, like, think of Aule like the Greco-Roman, like, Hephaestus, the forger of the gods, essentially. And he wants to create, like, beings that, you know, can help him out with, you know, making the world go round, as it were. So, he creates the dwarves. But Iluvatar's like, okay, Aule, what's going on here? Why are you creating dwarves? Don't you know that these guys don't have any life, essentially? Because, like, when a being creates life in Arda, it's not true life, because they don't have the secret fire to give life to beings, so Owlie's like, well, I just wanted to create, like, beings to help, like, you know, make the world go round, but if you want me to, as much as it pains me, I'll take my hammer and I will smash him. And as he's about to smash the dwarves kind of, like, have life given into them. And Iluvatar's like, okay, look, you can keep your dwarves, but they are not going to be waking up before my elves get here. So you need to put them to sleep for a while. And there's that. And I don't know if it was covered in that chapter, but Aule put the 7 fathers of the dwarves in pairs except for 1. 2 he puts in the Blue Mountains, 1 he puts in the Misty Mountains, and then the other 4 he puts, if I'm not mistaken, in the Red Mountains. But the one that he puts in the Misty Mountains at a place called Gundabad is called Durin. Now, Durin will be very important because of the line of Durin. And I'll explain it when that comes up. As for the other Valar who is, you know, wanting to create things, it's actually Aule's, like, wife, Yavanna. Now, she's like, okay, so you created the dwarves, and you didn't tell me until now? Because Aule was creating the dwarves in secret. And back and forth like a married couple. Essentially, Yavanna goes to Manwë and she's like, okay, look, I want to create something too because, you know, people are going to fuck up nature and stuff, and I really want something to help protect nature. So Manwë goes to Iluvatar, and Iluvatar says, okay, tell Yavanna this. Once the elves awake, spirits will come into some of the trees, and that will make them sentient. Thus, the creation of the Ents. And also, Iluvatar allows Manwë to have eagles. So the great eagles that you see in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are even older than the elves, which is pretty cool. But anyways, let us get to Chapter 3 of the Coming of the Elves and the Captivity of Melkor. Through long ages, the Valar dwelt in bliss in the light of the trees beyond the mountains of Aman. But all Middle-earth lay in a twilight under the stars. While the lamps had shone, growth began there which now was checked, because all was again dark. But already the oldest living things had arisen. In the seas the great weeds, and on earth the shadow of great trees, and in the valleys of the night-clad hills there were dark creatures, old and strong. To those lands and forests the Valar seldom came, save only Yavanna, you know, the lady who created the Ents, and Orome, the huntsman of the Valar. And Yavanna would walk there in the shadows, grieving because the growth and promise of the spring of Arda was stayed. And she said to sleep upon many things that had arisen in the spring, so that they should not age, but should wait for a time of awakening that yet should be. So here we have Yavanna basically doing the same thing that Aule was made to do for the dwarves. Instead of, like, her being like forced to because of Iluvatar being a little miffed, admittedly, at Aule for creating the dwarves before the elves. Yavanna basically is like, okay, I don't want anything to grow old and die, so everybody go to sleep now. You know, like a preschool teacher or something. Anyways, moving on. But in the north, Melkor built his strength, and he slept not, but watched and labored, and the evil things that he had perverted walked abroad, and the dark and slumbering woods were haunted by monsters and shapes of dread. And in Utumno, which you all may remember is the Sindarin word for hell, essentially, he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame. Balrogs, they were named in Middle-earth in later days. And in that dark time, Melkor bred many other monsters of diverse shapes and kinds that long troubled the world, and his realm spread now ever southward over Middle-earth. So, we get a clear look as to what Melkor is doing at this time. He's like calling forth all evil things to him, like evil spirits and monsters and creatures of like many like various shapes and forms. And Utumno, like I said before, the Sindarin word for hell, essentially. He brings them all over to there. And specifically the Balrogs are like drawn to Utumno because of their fiery hearts that are like Melkor. So there's that. And Melkor had his fortress and armory not far from the northwestern shores of the sea, to resist any assaults that might come from Aman. That stronghold was commanded by Sauron, lieutenant of Melkor, and it was named Angband. Now, here's where we first get the mention of Angband. Angband is going to be a major player in the later history of the First Age because, well, you can probably already gather from the title of this chapter that Melkor is going to get captured by the Valar. Spoilers if you've not read the Silmarillion. This is why we have the reading series here. But yeah, Angband, very important. Keep that in mind. Continuing on. It came to pass that the Valar held council, for they had become troubled by the tidings that Yavanna and Orome brought from the outer lands. And Yavanna spoke before the Valar, saying, Ye mighty Avarda, the vision of Iluvatar was brief and soon taken away, so that maybe we cannot guess within a narrow count of days the hour appointed. Yet be sure of this, the hour approaches, and within this age our hope shall be revealed, and the children shall awake. Shall we then leave the lands of their dwelling desolate and full of evil? Shall they walk in darkness while we have light? Shall they call Melkor Lord while Manwë sits upon Taniquetil? Now, Taniquetil, tallest mountain in Middle-earth. It's where Manwë and Varda live. And Tulkas cried, "Nay, let us make war let me restart. And Tulkas cried, "Nay, let us make war swiftly. Have we not rested from strife overlong, and is not our strength now renewed? Shall one alone contest with us forever?" But at the bidding of Mandos spoke, and he said, "In this age the children of Iluvatar shall come indeed, but they come not yet. Moreover," what was that? Sorry. Let me restart. That's where I was at. Moreover, it is doom that the firstborn shall come in the darkness, and shall look first upon the stars. Great light shall be for their waning. To Varda ever shall they call at need. Then Varda went forth from the council, and she looked out from the height of Taniquetil, and beheld the darkness of Middle-earth, beneath the innumerable stars, faint and far. Then she began a great labor, greatest of all the works of the Valar since their coming into Arda. She took the silver dews from the vats of Telperion, and therewith she made new stars and brighter against the coming of the firstborn. Wherefore she whose name out of the deeps of time and the labors of Ea was Tintaule, the kindler, was called after by the elves Elendari, Queen of the Stars, Karnil and Luinil, Nennar and Lumbar, Alcarinque and Elamire. She wrought in that time, and many other of the ancient stars she gathered together and set as signs in the heavens of Arda. Wilwarren, Tulumendil, Soronume, and Anarima, and Menel Makar, with his shining belt and the forebodings of the that forebodes the last battle that shall be at the end of days. Okay, so quick pause here. When it mentions in either The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, or The Silmarillion, like when they mention things like the last battle or the end of days or something like that, it is a reference to the second prophecy of Mandos, which at the end of this video I will look up and read word for word. Actually, at the end of the series with the Silmarillion, I will do that because I want to make sure that I don't spoil anything. So, yeah. But basically, the last battle, which is known as Dagoroth, think of it like a mixture of Ragnarok from Norse mythology. I cannot speak today. And how the end of the world is supposed to happen according to Judaism and Christianity. It's kind of like a mixture of both of them, because like Tolkien was a Catholic. Everybody knows that he was a Catholic. But he also drew inspiration from Norse mythology when it came to his creation of Middle-earth, so yeah. Anyways. And high in the north, as a challenge to Melkor, she set the crown of 7 mighty stars to swing. Velasirka, the sickle of the Valar, and sign of doom. Now, The 7 mighty stars are an important thing because when Durin the Deathless, who is the one dwarf that was put in the Misty Mountains, awakens at Mount Gundabad and comes down to where later Moria or Khazad-dûm will be built, in the Mirror Lake, he will look into it, and there will be 7 stars that kind of like appear above his head in the water, which will be a sign for Durin the Deathless to build his like realm in the Misty Mountains. So, fun little Easter egg there. It is told that even as Varda ended her labors, and they were long, when first Menel Malkar strode up the sky, and the blue fire of Helluin flickered in the mists above the borders of the world, in that hour the children of the earth awoke, the firstborn of Iluvatar. By the starlit mirror of Cuivienen, which is the waters of awakening, they rose from the sleep of Iluvatar, and while they dwelt yet silent by Cuivienen, their eyes beheld first of all things, the stars of heaven. Therefore, they have ever loved the starlight and have revered Varda Elendari above all the Valar. In the changes of the world, the shapes of lands and of seas have been broken and remade. Rivers have not kept their courses, neither have mountains remained steadfast, and to Cuivienen there is no returning. But it is said among the elves that it lay far off in the east of Middle-earth, and northward, and it was a bay in the inland sea of Helkar. And that sea stood where aforetime the roots of the mountains of Iluin had been before Melkor overthrew it. Many waters flowed down thither from heights of the east, and the first sound that were heard by the elves was the sound of water flowing and the sound of water falling over stone. Now you may be wondering, Josh, what is the inland sea of Helkar? Well, the Sea of Helkar is basically where Cuivienen was at, like near the, like Cuivienen was like the kind of, if you want to say beach area, kind of like the beach area, like right where the sea was at. And as the First Age progressed, it got smaller and smaller, and by the time of the First Age, like, being actually called the First Age, if I'm not mistaken, the Sea of Helkar became the Sea of Rune. However, I'm not sure, so do not quote me on that, because I'm not exactly sure about the Sea of Helkar, because there are some parts of the mythology of Middle-earth that even I'm not sure of. So, yeah. Long they dwelt in their first home by the waters under stars, in the water under stars, and they walked the earth in wonder, and they began to make speech, and to give names to all things that they had perceived. Themselves they called the Quendi, signifying those that speak with voices, for as yet they had met. For as yet they met. For as yet they had met no other living things that spoke or sang. And on a time it chanced that Orome rode eastward in his hunting, and he turned north by the shores of. Let me reread that. And on a time it chanced that Orome rode eastward in his hunting, and he turned north by the shores of Helkar, and passed under the shadows of the Orokarni, the mountains of the east. Orokarni is the Red Mountains. Then on a sudden, Nahar set up a great neighing and stood still. Nahar is Orome's, majestic horse. Honestly, if you could see a picture of Nahar being ridden by Orome at the Awakening of the Elves on Google or something, you will see that Nahar is pretty awesome. And actually, fun fact, Nahar is, I believe it's implied or outright stated, I'm not sure though, but Nahar is, I guess, supposed to be the forebearer of the Meros, which will be kind of intertwined with the histories of the Aeltheod, who will later become the Rohirrim. So yeah, pretty cool. Where was I? And Orome wondered and sat silent, and it seemed to him that in this quiet of the land, under the stars, he heard afar off many voices singing. Thus it was that the Valar found at last, as it were by chance, those whom they had long awaited. And Orome looked upon the elves. And Orome, looking upon the elves, was filled with wonder, as though they were beings sudden and marvelous and unforeseen. For so it shall ever be with the Valar. From without the world, though all things may be forethought in music and foreshown in vision from afar, to those who enter verily into Ea, each in its time shall be met as unawares as something new and unforetold. Let me just see something. Okay. Oh. Just need to check one thing. Okay, so in the beginning, the elder children of Iluvatar were stronger and greater than they have become since that. Let me retry that. In the beginning, the elder children of Iluvatar were stronger and greater than they have since become, but not more fair, for though the beauty of the Quendi in the days of their youth was beyond all of the beauty that Iluvatar has caused to be, it has not perished, but lives in the West, and sorrow and wisdom has enriched it. And Orome loved the Quendi, and named them in their own language, in their own tongue, Eldar, the people of the stars. But that name was after borne only by those who followed him upon the westward road. So here we get a little bit of like a scene of Orome seeing the elves, and it's like, oh, these guys are cool, and they're singing with many voices. I know, I'm gonna name them after their own tongue. These guys are the Eldar. Now, some of them are gonna be like, okay, who is this guy? Why is he riding a horse? And, oh my god, is he gonna kidnap us? Which we'll get into the next part, don't worry. And then the others are like, this guy isn't evil. He could be one of the Valar or something. Why don't we just trust him? Continuing on. Yet many of the Quendi were filled with dread at his coming, and this was the doing of Melkor, ever the bastard. For by after knowledge the wise declare that Melkor, ever watchful, was first aware of the awakening of the Quendi, and sent shadows and evil spirits to spy upon them and waylay them. So it came to pass, some years ere the coming of Orome, that if any of the elves strayed far abroad, alone or few together, they would often vanish and never return. And the Quendi said that the hunter had caught them, and they were afraid. And indeed, the most ancient songs of the elves, of which echoes are remembered still in the west, tell of the shadow shapes that walked in the hills above Cuivianen, or would pass suddenly over the stars, and of the dark rider upon his wild horse that pursued those that wandered to take them and devour them. Now Melkor greatly hated and feared the riding of Orome, and either he sent indeed his dark servants as riders, or he sent lying whispers abroad, for the purpose that the Quendi should shun Orome, if ever they should meet. Thus it was that when Nahar neighed and Orome indeed came among them, some of the Quendi hid themselves, and some fled and were lost. But those that had courage and stayed perceived swiftly that the great rider was no shape out of darkness, for the light of Amon was in his face, and all the noblest of the elves were drawn towards it. So since Orome is a good guy, the light of heaven essentially shone upon his face, and because of that, the elves who were like, this guy is not the dark rider that is like kidnapping us and doing God knows what to us, let's trust him. Whereas the elves that fled are like, yeah, no, fuck this noise, I'm out of here, just staying away from all this bullshit. So yeah, there's that. Anyways, but of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor, little is known of a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pits of Utumno, or has explored the darkness of the councils of Melkor? Yet this is held true by the wise of Erisea, that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Utumno was broken were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, and whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Iluvatar, and not that had life of its own, nor semblance of life, could ever Melkor make since his rebellion in the Ainulindale, that is the music of the Ainur, before the beginning. So say the wise. And deep in their dark hearts the orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This, it may be said, was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Iluvatar. So in this section, we get Melkor ensnaring some of the elves that hid away from Orome or ran away from Orome, brought them to Utumno, tortured them, imprisoned them, and manipulated them, and over the many cruelties that those elves had to endure, they tragically were created to be the orcs. So yeah, that is pretty fucked up on so many levels. Continuing on. Orome tarried a while among the Quendi, and then swiftly he rode back over the land and sea to Valinor, and brought the tidings to Valmar, and he spoke of the shadows that troubled Cuiviénen. Then the Valar rejoiced, and yet they were in doubt amid their joy, and they debated long what counsel it were best to take for the guarding of the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor. But Orome returned at once to Middle-earth and abode with the Eldar. Manwë sat long in thought upon Taniquetil, and he sought the counsel of Iluvatar. And coming down to Valmar, he summoned the Valar to the Ring of Doom. And thither came even Ulmo from the Outer Sea. Then Manwë said to the Valar, "This is the counsel of Iluvatar in my heart, that we should take up again the mastery of Arda, and whatsoever it cost, and deliver the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor." Then Tulkas was glad, but Aule was grieved, foreboding the hurts of the world that must come of that strife. But the Valar made ready, and came forth from Aman in strength of war, resolving to assault the fortresses of Melkor and make an end. Never did Melkor forget that this war was made for the sake of the elves, and that they were the cause of his downfall. Yet they had no part in those deeds, and they know little of the writing of the might of the West against the North in the beginning of their days. So, this war between the Valar, the Maiar, and Morgoth and his servants is known as the War for the Sake of the Elves. Not the very first war within Arda, because technically speaking, the Ainu Lindale could be considered the very first war, and then the second war could be the marring of Arda with the destruction of the lamps and the ruining of the Spring of Arda. So this, technically speaking, could be considered the third one if we want to be technical about it, but yeah. Melkor met the onsets of the Valar in the northwest of Middle-earth, and all that region was much broken. But the first victory of the hosts of the west was swift, and the servants of Melkor fled before them to Utumno. Then the Valar passed over Middle-earth, and they set a guard over Cuiviénen, and thereafter the Quendi knew nothing of the great battle of the Powers, another name for the war for the sake of the elves, save that the earth shook and groaned beneath them, and the waters were moved, and in the north there were lights as mighty as of mighty fires. Long and grievous was the siege of Utumno, and many battles were fought before its gates, of which naught but the rumor of is known. Long and grievous was the siege of Utumno, and many battles were fought before its gates, of which naught but the rumor is known to the elves. In that time, the shape of Middle-earth was changed, and the great sea that sundered it from Aman grew wide and deep, and it broke in upon the coasts and made a deep gulf to the southward. Many lesser bays were made between the Great Gulf and Helcaraxe, far in the north, where Middle-earth and Aman came nigh together. Of these, the Bay of Balar was the chief, and into it the mighty river Sirion flowed down from the new raised highlands northwards. Dorthonion and the mountains about Hithlum. Dorthonion and Hithlum will be important, so keep those names in mind. The lands of the far north were all made desolate in those days. For there Utumno was delved exceedingly deep, and its pits were filled with fire and with great hosts of the servants of Melkor. But at the last the gates of Utumno were broken, and the halls unroofed, and Melkor took refuge in the uttermost pits. Then Tulkas stood forth as champion of the Valar, and wrestled with him, and cast him upon his face. And he was bound with the chain Angainor, that Aule had wrought and led captive, and the world had peace for a long age. Nonetheless, the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and the caverns hidden with the seats far under the fortresses of Angband and Utumno. Many evil things still lingered there, and others were dispersed and fled into the dark and roamed in the waste places of the world, awaiting a more evil hour. And Sauron they did not find. Now, when the siege of Utumno and the siege of Angband happened, when the Valar and the Maiar came to, kick the crap out of Melkor and bring him back to Valinor and shit, they was like, you know what, we're kind of on a time crunch here, we're trying to find Melkor, we don't have time to be going through Utumno and Angband, so let's just, leave Angband to, be a little bit destroyed. Utumno, however, that's our chief enemy. Let's go there. Let's ruin the fuck out of it. And let's get Melkor. And they do. But because of their... I don't want to call it stupidity, because the Valar are really wise. I mean, they do make mistakes from time to time, but that's neither here nor there. But in their avarice of, not looking into Angband, they kind of let the Balrogs, still exist, and they also let Sauron exist. If they would have been let's check both places, they would have been able to get Melkor's greatest servants, the Balrogs, and Sauron, so... Really, Valar? Really? I digress. Sorry, mini rant's over. Okay, but when the battle was ended, and from the ruin of the north, great clouds arose and hid the stars. The Valar drew Melkor back to Valinor, bound hand and foot and blindfold, and he was brought to the Ring of Doom. There he lay upon his face before the feet of Manwë, and sued for pardon, but his prayer was denied, as it should have been. And he was cast into prison in the fastness of Mandos. Mandos, of course, is both the name of the place, like Hades is the name of the being and the place. Mandos is the name of the halls of Mandos and Mandos himself, whence none can escape, neither Vala, nor elf, nor mortal man. Vast and strong are those halls, and they were built in the west of the land of Aman. There was Melkor, doomed to abide for 3 long ages before his cause should be tried anew, or he should plead again for pardon. Keep that little last bit of that paragraph in mind, because that's going to be important. Then again, the Valar were gathered in council, and they were divided in debate. For some, and of those Ulmo was the chief, held that the Quendi should be left free to walk as they would in Middle-earth, and with their gifts of skill to order all the lands and heal their hurts. But the most part feared for the Quendi in the dangerous world amid the deceits of the Sarlot's dusk. And they were filled moreover with love of the beauty of the elves, and desired their fellowship. At last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers of the At last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers in the light of the trees forever. And Mandos broke his silence, saying, "So it is doomed." For that this summons came many woes afterwards befell. And from this summons came many woes that afterwards befell. But the elves were at first unwilling to hearken to the summons, for they had as yet seen the Valar only in their wrath as they went to war, save Orome alone, and they were filled with dread. Therefore Orome was sent again to them, and he chose from among them ambassadors, who should go to Valinor and speak for their people. And these were Ingwe, Finwë, and Elwë, who afterwards were kings. Keep these three elves in your mind, because they are important. And coming, they were filled with awe by the glory and majesty of the Valar, and desired greatly the light and splendor of the trees. Then Orome brought them back to Cuiviénen, and they spoke before their people, and counseled them to heed the summons of the Valar, and remove into the west. Therefore, then befell the first sundering of the elves, for the kindred of Ingwe and the most part of the kindreds of Finwë and Elwë were swayed by the words of their lords, and were willing to depart and follow Orome. And those were known ever after as the Eldar, by the name that Orome gave the elves to the elves in the beginning, in their own tongue. Now, remember when Orome first found the elves? He called all of the elves the Eldar, but because some of the elves hid themselves and some was like, fuck this shit, I'm out, essentially, those that stayed would forever have to be known as the Eldar. But many refused the summons, preferring the starlight and the wide spaces of Middle-earth to the rumor of the trees. And these, are the Avari, the unwilling, and they were sundered in that time from the Eldar, and met never again until many ages were past. The Eldar prepared now a great march from their first homes in the east, and they were arrayed in 3 hosts. The smallest host, and the first to set forth, was led by Ingwe, the most high lord of all the elvish clans. He entered into Valinor and sits at the feet of the powers, and all elves revere his name. But he came never back, nor looked again upon Middle-earth. The Vanyar were his people. They were the fair elves, the beloved of Manwë and Varda, and few among men have spoken with them. So, Ingwe, the first of the elves to be named, is not only the High King of the Vanyar, but he's also the High King of all of the elves. So that's pretty cool. Next came the Noldor, a name of wisdom, the people of Finwë. You know, that second elf king. They were the Deep Elves, the friends of Aule, and they were renowned in song for they fought and labored long and grievously in the Northlands of old. The greatest host came last, and they are named the Teleri, for they tarried on the road, and were not wholly of a mind to pass from the dusk to the light of Elenor. In water they had great delight, and those that came at last to the western shores were enamored by the sea. The sea elves, therefore, they became in the land of Aman, the Falmari, for they made music beside the breaking waves. 2 lords they had, for their number was great. Elwe Singolo, which signifies grey mantle, and Olwe, his brother. Now, it'll be covered in the next chapter, but Elwe is a pretty freaking important person within the history of Middle-earth. And his brother will also be important, but also kind of not in a way. I don't know how to really describe him. Like, Olwe, his brother, will lead the Teleri that do want to get to Valinor as quickly as possible to Valinor. But he doesn't really do much aside from, like, one other time. So, take that as you will. But anyways, continuing on. These were the 3 kindreds of the Eldalier. Eldalier being the elves, who, passing at length into the uttermost west in the days of the trees, were called the Calaquendi, the elves of the lights. But others of the Eldar there were who set out indeed upon the westward march, but became lost upon the long road, or turned aside, or lingered on the shores of Middle-earth. And these were for the most part of the kindred of the Teleri, as it told hereafter. They dwelt by the sea, or wandered in the woods and mountains of the world, yet their hearts were turned towards the west. Those elves the Calaquendi called the Umanyar, since they came never to the land of Aman and the Blessed Realm. But the Umanyar and the Avari alike they call the Moraquendi, elves of the darkness. For they have never beheld the light of the light that was before the sun and the moon. Now, you may be wondering, are these elves evil? No, they are not evil. There are evil elves within Tolkien's works, but they're not evil in the sense of, you know, I want to do evil deeds, like these Umanyar and Avari. Basically, the Avari and the Umanyar are elves that just never saw the light of the 2 trees, because they was either unwilling to go, or they just was like, you know, I just like being here in Middle-earth. I like the stars, I like the sea, I like the waters here. Just let me be, please. Yeah, anyways. It is told that when the hosts of the Eldali departed from Cuivianen, Orome rode their head upon Nahar, his white horse shod with gold, and passing northward about the Sea of Helkar, they turned towards the west. Before them great clouds hung still black in the north above the ruins of war. and the stars in that region were hidden. Then not a few Then not a few grew afraid and repented and turned back and are forgotten. Long and slow was the march of the Eldar into the west, for the leagues of Middle-earth were uncounted and weary and pathless. Nor did the Eldar desire to hasten, for they were filled with wonder at all that they saw, and by many lands and rivers they wished to abide. And though all were yet willing to wander, many feared rather their journey's end than hoped for it. Therefore, whenever Orome departed, having at times other matters to heed, they halted and went forward no more, until he returned to guide them. And it came to pass, after many years of journeying, that in this manner that the Eldar took their course through a forest. And they came to a great river, wider than any they had yet seen, and beyond it were mountains whose sharp horns seemed to pierce the realm of the stars. This river, it is said, was even the river which was after called Anduin the Great, and was ever the frontier of the westlands of Middle-earth. But the mountains were the Hithyglir, the towers of mist, upon the borders of Eriador. Yet they were taller and more terrible in those days, and were reared by Melkor to hinder the riding of Orome. Now the Teleri abode long on the east bank of that river, and wished to remain there. But the Vanyar and the Noldor passed over it, and Orome led them into the passes of the mountains. And when Orome was gone forward, the Teleri looked upon the shadowy heights and were afraid. Okay, so you remember the Anduin River from The Lord of the Rings, and the Misty Mountains from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings? Yeah, these are those two places that are mentioned in that paragraph that I just got done reading. And oh boy, the Misty Mountains were a lot bigger and terrifying because of Melkor fucking around in Middle-earth with everything, so yeah, thanks a lot, Melkor. Anyways, then one arose in the host of Olwe, which was ever the hindmost on the road. Lenwë he was called. He forsook the westward march, and led a numerous people southwards down the great river, and they passed out of knowledge of their kin until long years were past. Those were the Nandor, and they became a people apart, unlike their kin, save that they loved water, and dwelt most beside falls and running streams. Greater knowledge they had of living things, trees and herb, bird and beast, than all other elves. In after years, Denethor, no, not that Denethor, not even the man from Gondor, another Denethor, an elf, actually, son of Lenwë, turned again west at last, and led a part of that people over the mountains into Beleriand ere the rising of the moon. Now keep the rising of the moon in mind, because that will be important in a future chapter. At length, the Vanyar and the Noldor came over Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains, which the elves after named Beleriand, and the foremost companies passed over the Vale of Sirion, and came down to the shores of the Great Sea, between Drengist and the Bay of Balar. But when they beheld it, great fear came upon them, and many withdrew into the woods and highlands of Beleriand. Then Orome departed, and returned to Valinor to seek counsel of Manwë, and left them. And the host of the Teleri passed over the misty mountains, and crossed into the wide lands of Eriador, being urged on by Elwë Singolo, for he was eager to return to Valinor, and the lights that he had beheld, and he wished not to be sundered from the Noldor, for he had great friendship with Finwë, their lord. This is one thing that I will say right now. In future chapters, keep in mind that Elwë will not be so keen on some of the Noldor because of something that happens in a later chapter. Not gonna spoil it, but just keep that in mind. Thus, after many years, the Teleri also came at last over Ered Luin into the eastern regions of Beleriand. There they halted and dwelt for a while beyond the river Gelion. And that is where we're going to end Chapter 3. I will get Chapter 4 and Chapters 4, 5, and 6 read up here quickly for you guys. Anyways, I hope you all are doing well. May God bless you. See you in the next video. Bye.